Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's conversation. We're going to get into the debate or whether or not it's better to own or to rent, a home slash condo, which is like one small part of, your financial journey. But obviously buying a home is, one of the biggest purchases you're going to make in your life. So there are many, many things to consider. Before we dive in, feel free to grab something to take notes with, a journal, pen, paper, your notepad, your computer, because I know we're going to be exchanging and sharing a lot of knowledge tonight. For those who don't know me, my name is Villij. I'm the research manager here at the Villij, and I'm joined by Cindy, who is the co-founder and CEO of MakeCents. And she really specializes in working with millennials to help them with overcoming financial stress and really putting them on a path towards financial freedom. I can attest to this. I've worked with Cindy and continuing to work with Cindy. She's really all about financial literacy as a tool for success and really wants to empower and educate folks. So I am going to put a few house rules in the chat, obviously because this is going to be recorded. I want to make sure that if you are comfortable, you have your camera on. We want this to be interactive and engaging. And we also understand that money is a sensitive topic. So we really want to make sure that we're all being respectful and mindful of everyone's experiences. Throughout the conversation, please feel free to unmute yourself and just ask questions, or you can engage in the chat if you'd like to. Yeah. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Cindy.
Thank you so much, Busy. I appreciate the intro. And again, as she noted, I will make time for questions in between slides. I'll prompt you at that point if you want to come on the mic, but otherwise, I've got the chat box pinned beside me, so I'll be keeping an eye out for any questions, pop questions in the chat at any time. Okay, so let me get my screen share up. Okay, and we're seeing my full screen presentation. Just want to make sure it's all good.
Yep.
Perfect. Let me make sure the chat is still pinned to the side here. Awesome. Okay, so this is such a big topic. It comes up in nearly every single client meeting that I have. I would say that in general, this is a pretty large goal for most of us as millennials looking to buy a home, whether we feel like it's something that we want in actuality or something that we're being pressured into doing because it's just the next logical step at this stage in our life. Well, today I'm going to, maybe depressingly so, debunk a lot of assumptions around the two and whether it's worthwhile to go in one direction or the other. All right, so let's start with what's on the screen here. This is a quote pulled from a survey by Royal LePage. I'm hearing some background sounds. If we can just make sure everyone's mic is muted. Okay, so as of this year, nearly almost 50% of Canadians aged 25 to 35, so the bulk of millennials, currently own their home. And a quarter of these homeowners purchased a property during the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, no surprise that there was a lot of buying happening during the pandemic. Definitely factors such as feeling crowded with roommates in a small apartment during a work from home era contributed to this big push to suddenly buy. But for a while, it even puts, significant downward pressure on rental prices. So if you were looking for a house or a new apartment in the last year, I would say things have changed now, leveled off and gotten back to normal in the past 6 months, but definitely during 2020, if you were looking to find a new apartment rental, there's a lot of instances where I heard people finding bigger spaces, even further downtown for less money because people wanted out of their apartments. Everyone was pushing to buy a home because they wanted more space. And that was even further aggravating the housing prices as if it wasn't already hard enough to buy in. So even among non-homeowners, 84% intend to invest in a home in the future, with 68% planning to make the move in the next 5 years. So as mortgage rates fell to low levels, the competition for entry-level housing lessened. Young people saw a window of opportunity and they went for it. Okay, this is just stats, right? A lot of us are probably like surprised to see that 50% of millennials currently own their home. That doesn't tell the full story. That doesn't tell us, you know, who helped out with that down payment, what was taken to qualify for that mortgage, how big of a mortgage was it. When I'm speaking with clients, I just want you to know when you see stats like this, don't let that add to feelings of, wait a second, am I just really behind on life? Am I not doing enough? Seeing the behind the scenes as a planner, I know that often the bank of mom and dad comes into play quite a bit. You never know, you know, how much help they're receiving from their spouse or partner and how well they're doing financially and how much older their partner may be as well. But typically speaking, from my personal experience, this is not something that's easily feasible as a single income household, someone who doesn't have a parent or a partner as a co-signer, who isn't getting, you know, this huge injection of cash to help with the down payment, etc. So these stats don't tell the full story. Let me just, you know, start the presentation off with that preface there. Young buyers have a positive association with home ownership in general. They see the value in it and they've done the math. Currently, a monthly mortgage payment can equate to a little more than renting. So that's definitely what I found a very funny quote, because again, that doesn't tell the full story. Sure, you can get a mortgage that might equate to, you know, what your monthly rent would be, and then you might just take that at face value and be like, well, of course, the math makes sense. Why wouldn't I buy if this same amount of monthly payment is buying into equity versus just being wasted on rent? But again, what did it take to qualify for that mortgage? What else is going on in terms of, you know, their investments? Did they have to completely deplete everything they had just to afford this? You know, is the person who is renting for the same amount of money still sitting with a large stack of cash and investments? And what does that mean for their future? That's something I'm actually going to dive into, the nitty gritty of the numbers today. So we're going to see that, you know, again, this quote doesn't tell the full story. And this type of thinking is a really dangerous road to go down if you feel like, you know, just comparing side by side a monthly mortgage versus monthly rent tells the full story. And if they're equal, then sure, buying is better. That's not always the case. For your long-term picture, for your, you know, immediate term cash flow needs, and also what it means in terms of other consequences with your life, what you can and can't do. So let's look at some more stats to really help explain the story, help explain why you're feeling like it is so difficult to get into the market without help. And again, I'm going to keep stressing that, you know, that earlier stat about half of millennials having a home, I am sure that half of that half had a lot of help to get there from their parents or their partners. So this is some stats pulled from Global News. This is recent, pulled from stats this year, 2021. Numbers now, today, compared to 1976 for millennials aged 25 to 34. Well, back then they weren't millennials, they were boomers, but ages 25 to 34. We can see that, you know, student debt has gone up quite a bit. Cost of post-secondary education has gone up a lot, more than doubled. Housing prices, average housing prices, has also, you know, more than doubled. But we jump into this quadrant here, and somehow this number has not changed. In fact, it's gone down. Yeah, Bissy, I see you rolling your head. I know, right? This helps explains a lot already, because we're seeing these numbers change. Okay, debt is higher, cost of secondary education is higher, house prices are higher. Naturally, you know, we should be earning more as well, but that's actually not the case. You know, average earnings have not kept up with the rate of inflation. Cost of education has, you know, the amount of debt we're taking on has gone up with inflation, same with housing prices, plus a lot of other factors, but somehow earnings have not. And many of us in this demographic are actually, I mean, this is probably based a lot on, average employment earnings. A lot of us here in this room are self-employed. So average, corporate employment earnings doesn't even touch what we deal with. I don't even know that most of us have an average, because from month to month, it's like, we're up here, we're down there, we're up here, we're down here. It's a wild ride. So it's even more precarious for us as entrepreneurs to make this work. And ultimately what this slide tells us is that hard work just doesn't pay off like it used to. My parents bought a 3-story home in downtown Toronto, I want to say about 35 years ago, for $60K all in. That's what it cost. They had to take out a mortgage at the time, yeah, but that's the value of the house. This house now is well over $1 million easily. Can you imagine if we could buy a home for $60K? My parents were immigrants from Portugal. Neither of them had any education past high school. They got, my mom got a corporate job at TD Bank. My dad started his own business. They had their own, financial issues, but nonetheless, they got in there and they got to take advantage, at least my mom did, since she was an employee, take advantage of these average earnings back then, and to buy a house that was roughly about, 1 year's income. 1 year's income. Think about what you earn now in a year. Can you imagine a house being worth that much? Nobody can, because not even a down payment is what we make in a year for most of us, unless most of you are earning, 200K or more, a 20% down payment. I see Brittany commenting, a tiny home, maybe. Yeah, okay, well, tiny home is like 400 square feet. Great, you've got a room for 1 year's salary. So it's just like not realistic, and my parents, I had to talk to them quite a bit too, to help them understand what I'm dealing with and how things have changed. It's like, Mom, your situation is not my situation. You already had a kid by age 20. You were earning this 58K by that time. You had a home, you had a car, all this stuff that is just a pipe dream for us now. So this is a very telling slide, depressing statistics, but it should be very worrisome about the current real estate market. Like at some point, something's got to give. We're going to be completely priced out. The generation that comes after us, definitely very priced out. So who's owning homes at this point? Probably just investors. Anyone who owns a home to live in it, that's probably going to be, few and far between if something doesn't change. Saving for a 20% down payment over the course of time, and how long did it take on average to get there? Well, in 1976, when the majority of baby boomers born between 1946 to 65 were coming of age as adults, it took a typical young person about 5 years of full-time work to save a 20% down payments on an average price home in GTA, even Metro Vancouver, and a lot of other parts of Canada. Flash forward to today, home prices have skyrocketed while people's earnings have lost ground relative to inflation by thousands of dollars. So a lot of the time when I'm meeting with clients, again, this 5-year timeline is still so deeply ingrained, because I'm hearing that often too, in terms of, okay, I would like to buy a home. What do you think I can do in 5 years? I'd like to have a down payment in 5 years. I hear that all the time. That 5-year timeline is still ingrained in us, but it's not realistic. 5 years for 20%. Well, that's, if we're going to assume like $1 million home, that's 200K. What's 200,000 divided by 5? We have to save $40,000 a year. Most of us cannot save $40,000 a year. Many of us are probably, maybe even bringing in only 40K net after taxes in income, never mind being able to save that amount. So things have changed. And if we assume that it's going to take, 10 years plus to save a down payment, consider even what inflation is doing in the meantime, further eroding what you're saving up over the course of time. So by the time you've saved up a 20% down, a 20% down payment in 10 years, inflation will make that 20% actually be worth much less, because home prices are going to keep going up. So when do we catch up? Inflation is just tearing us apart right now. Is it worth stretching ourselves thin to scrimp and save for a down payment during our most formidable career development years? You know, we have that range 25 to 35 that's come up often. And again, the bulk of millennials are within that age gap. Is it worth spending this time while you are trying to build a business to save up for this essentially money pit, when we can spend this time instead setting ourselves up for success in the long term? So consider how much longer it's taking us to afford a down payment. We really do have to consider the opportunity cost of potentially investing that money for another purpose instead. So let's get into that. This slide is probably going to look familiar to those of you who attended the last session. That was in August. We talked about investing. I brought up this slide then to, showcase the effects of compound interest over time and what it can do for you. So let me dive into this again. We've got an example here of two friends who are 25 at the time, Abby and Alana, and they both have some different ideals here. So Abby's pretty responsible. She decides she's going to contribute $500 a month. So that's, what does that come out to? $500 a month, $6,000 a year. Starting at age 25, she's going to do it for 10 years, but then she stops. So at age 35, she's no longer contributing. She lets what she contributed already just grow from there while invested until age 65. And in doing so, she's able to come up with almost $1 million, 912K. This is assuming you're earning about 8% growth. And for the record, I feel like I'm being a bit conservative here with the 8%. I'd say that if you're investing somewhat aggressively, in a growth fund. So if any of you are in ETFs or in mutual funds using platforms like Wealthsimple, you hear terms like conservative or balanced fund or growth fund used often. Typically a growth fund, which is mostly stocks, might get you on average about 10% return. That's a pretty decent return. So I'm being conservative here with the 8%. Alana, on the other hand, waits 10 years. She's like, no, hashtag YOLO, my 20s are for living life. I want to travel. I want to do things. I'm not worried about retirement at all. I'll get around to it. So she doesn't start contributing until age 35, but she contributes the same amount, $500 a month, which is $6,000 a year, except she does it for 30 years. So 35 to age 65. Okay, so she's contributing 3 times as much as Abby. But because she waited 10 years to do it, she still ends up with less money overall. 700K versus 900K. That's a good almost $250,000 less than her friend just because she waited 10 years, even though, she contributed 3 times as much, 180 instead of 60K. Abby got to experience a lot more growth just by virtue of letting it sit there sooner and let it grow for 30 years, plus the 10 years she spent contributing, versus Alana, which was hustling and trying to add to her savings to catch up for the full 30 years. And she still lost. So this is not really meant to depress you. If you're, 30 or 35, you're like, wait a second, am I Alana right now? Because I haven't started saving yet and I feel like I've missed out. Ultimately, what you should be taking away from this is that the best time to start investing was yesterday. The next best time is today. So just start saving as soon as you can, as much as you can, because time really does matter. Time spent invested. So now think about this for a second. 25 to 35. Imagine spending that time, if that's the average time it takes for us now to save up for a down payment. And, 180K, what does that get us? Almost, well, I guess it depends on the value of the home, but it can be a 20% down payment. If you're Alana, if you contributed this much, again, assuming you do it over 10 years, it's going to take a lot more per month to get there. Abby only needed to contribute 60K to get to a walking place by retirement. But it just goes to show that, if you were spending that first 10 years to buy a home, what does it do to your retirement? probably a lot, you know, in a negative way. And we're going to get into some real numbers later. So let's think about, you know, realistically, where are we getting our retirement income from? Because maybe some of you are looking at this like, okay, that's nice, but how important is retirement really? That feels so far away. Like, sure, I can appreciate what you're trying to say here. The sooner you start investing, the sooner it starts compounding on its growth, the better. But do I really need to worry? Aren't there things like federal pension? You know, won't my corporation help me with that? Maybe, maybe not. Let's take a look at the slide here. If we're going to rely on CPP or OAS, OAS again is for lower income individuals, assuming that you have been earning enough throughout your employment years to qualify for maximum CPP. Maximum CPP today in 2021 is still only $1,200 a month. No one's getting by on just CPP. If you didn't work somewhere that provided a corporate pension, and again, this is typically for salaried positions at larger corporations, a small startup is certainly not offering you a corporate pension. If you're an entrepreneur, unless you incorporate and you get to a position where you can afford to implement something like this yourself for your employees and yourself, most of us are never gonna be the beneficiary of something like a defined benefit or defined contribution pension plan. That's just not going to happen for us. So if we're looking at just this because we're in a position where, well, I can't save right now, I'm going to rely on a federal pension, it's kind of laughable. Granted, this does index to inflation, so it will continue to increase exactly on par with inflation. But I've done the math on this too. And if we assume that average inflation is 2%, and we're looking at 30 years from now, that's still only $2,200 a month. But again, that's in tomorrow's dollars. Still adjusted to today's dollars and what it buys us, it's $1,200 a month. Neither one of us are getting by on $1,200 a month. That doesn't even pay rent. So for the most part, we are going to have to self-fund. That's our savings and investments within our RSPs, TFSAs, non-registered accounts, anywhere we can pull it from. For anyone who is writing off the importance of saving for retirement, and you're an entrepreneur, you should not write it off. This is definitely something we should be thinking about now to be a little bit more like Abby, where we can save a lot in advance and be set up for success later. And the next slide is actually gonna, make that more telling for us and what is possible technically. So let's assume that you do spend 10 years saving up the equivalent of a down payment. So assume a $1 million home, 20% of that is $200K. That takes a lot for most of us to come up with $200K. If we are investing the money while we are saving up for it, then it takes about $1,100 a month. And again, that might still seem like a lot for many of us to set aside in savings. Let me do some quick math here. $1,100 a month is probably about $275 a week, if that makes it more meaningful for you. So assume that you can't afford that. And then we're going to be an Abby about it. And after 10 years, so right here, we are contributing for the first 10 years, we stop contributing. And then we let it ride. And again, this is assuming an 8% rate of growth. So for the next 30 years, it is just doing its thing. So you can see just for a hot second, that slope flattens out a little bit because we've stopped contributing, but then very quickly, the amount it's earning in that 8% growth outshines it, and that slope gets very, very steep. You can see how all of a sudden what you're earning in investment growth alone is far outshining what you were putting in back in the day, your $1,100 a month contribution. So compound growth matters. This is Abby's situation right here. You end up with $2 million after 30 years of just letting it grow. I don't know if that's meaningful to you. You think about what it takes to save up $200K and you're so excited, like, great, I can finally put down a down payment. if you do, this is not your situation. You're not going to just easily end up with $2 million. And might I add that during these 30 years, you're not contributing. So suddenly you have this excess $1,100 a month of cash flow to do whatever you want. You're now free to travel and do other things, or you can start saving up for a down payment, because at this stage in your life, and I'm assuming here, you know, start at 25, stop saving at 35, great. I've got the starter down payment to my retirement set up. Now I'm going to invest that, set it aside, and now I'm going to save up for a down payment. Because during these years, 35 plus, it's likely by this point, you're in the groove of your business. You're making better money. Your client flow is more regular. It's not as hard for you to set aside that $1,100 a month. It might even be much quicker for you to save up that 200K or whatever it takes to save up a down payment by that point. But the point of this scenario is the Coast FIRE method. FIRE is an acronym that you might have heard before. It stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And the COAST aspect is work as hard as you can to save as much as you can today until you hit that magic number. In this case, it's 200K. Then you coast. You let it sit, you let it ride, and let that grow in the investment market so that you can hit $2 million. You know, by age 35, I don't even have to think about retirement planning anymore. I am not making a single contribution towards my retirement. I've taken care of it because I built up the down payment. Now I let it grow. At 35, I can now think about, oh my God, I can take all the trips I want. I can very quickly save up for a down payment. Maybe I didn't get the house in my 20s. So what? I'll have a house by the time I'm 40. But you know what? To me, that feels worthwhile because guess what? I don't have to think about retirement. And I am still working with clients today who are in their 40s and 50s who haven't started saving for retirement. They are stressed. They got their house. Yeah, they had their kids, but house, kids, cars, all that to me just means debt, higher expenses. So they are so far behind on their retirement. They probably will never have the luxury of being able to stop working because they're going to have to keep saving and saving and saving. They'll never get there. What I'm trying to show you here is if you just allow yourself to switch priorities, prioritize your financial independence, that financial freedom first, and then worry about the down payment and getting a home when you can afford it more easily, your life is going to be a lot easier in the long run. And in this situation, if you have $2 million at age 65, well, now I'm going to invest it more conservatively. It's not earning 8% anymore. It's earning 5%. But nonetheless, I can take out $124,000 of income every single year for 30 years until age 95 in retirement. And again, you know, that might seem like a lot. It's like, damn, like maybe I don't even need $2 million because that sounds pretty cushy and I don't need to go that far. But again, inflation, 124K a year, 30 years from now is actually worth more like 68K in today's dollars. And now that's more in line with like a regular income. So if you think that this is very lofty, who actually needs $2 million to enter into retirement? Well, we do. Millennials do. Because $2 million is still only going to bring you just a regular employment income. I mean, I don't want to say 70K is regular for most people, but in a lot of cases, it can be a starting or average attainable wage if you're an employer, or you know, an average target for an entrepreneur. So $2 million at 65 is a goal. 200K by age 35 should be a new goal. Bear that in mind. I
think there's some questions. Yeah, I was just gonna say there's some questions in the chat, and actually, I'd like to think about like for those of us who may be starting a bit later. Like, are we just like shifting the timelines a bit? Are we adjusting and thinking about like how we can ensure that we have at least that minimum 70K, you know, at retirement or more?
Yeah, of course. So Simi's asking, you start saving the down payment in 35. In this scenario, you know, what I'm saying here is that from 25 to 35, you are actively setting aside the $1,100 a month. You know, you could get there in 10 years. By 35, you've got 200K. That's what I'm saying here, that 35, you've managed, or I don't want to put an age on it. Let's just say in 10 years from today, if you're starting from zero, then 10 years from now, if this is what you're saving a month, invested at this rate, 10 years from now, you could have 200K. So if you're 35 today, assume that this is age 45 here, you've got 200K. What do you do with that 200K? And in this scenario, I'm saying, let it sit. Don't waste it on a down payment just yet. Let it sit, and here's how it'll grow. So during these years, you're no longer contributing $1,100 a month. This is now extra cash flow that you have available to do whatever you want. So you can take another 10 years, and we assume that everything is, 10 years ahead. So from 45 to 55, take 10 years to save 200K. But what I'm trying to suggest to you is that by that point, if this represents age 45 for you instead of 35, chances are you're in your peak earning years. So saving $1,100 a month is probably no big deal. It can probably be more like $2,200 a month, or even more than that. It likely won't take you 10 years to save up a down payment. It'll very likely take you much less time to save up the money, because you are now in your 40s, earning the most money you have ever in your life. That's usually the peak earning years. It's like 45 to 60s when you're making the most money, the most seamlessly. So this scenario is just saying, okay, well, what happens to the 200K here after 10 years if I let it sit for 30 years? So if we fast forward again, assume you start at 35, you got 200K by 45. Now you've stopped contributing, you let it sit. Well, here's what it can grow to in 30 years. So you won't be 65, you'll be 75, but nonetheless, the chart still tells us where we'll be, even if you still want to assume, 10 years sooner, which would be 60, 55, it would be around here. So you'd have about $1 million instead of 2 million. So in those last 10 years, clearly, compound interest is working double time. But if we assume you're 45 here, you still want to retire at 65, then you're going to be about here. About here at 50, 65, because we're going to add 10 years to this. You're going to have about $1 million. And I've done the math on this too. It's almost exactly half again that you would receive in income. So instead of that 124, it might be something more like 75K, which again, adjusted for inflation is more like 48K, 45K. So just food for thought. I didn't want to get too technical and confuse you with the ages here. I probably should have just put number of years. But this is really meant to inspire this idea of prioritizing your investment contribution efforts towards retirement first, so that you can easily coast and then never have to think about making further contributions. And Simite, thank you for confirming that you get it. I'm glad I'm not just rambling here, because I feel so passionately about this. This coast fire strategy, I am personally hustling real freaking hard towards this. I am so aggressively putting all my efforts towards ditching all of my high interest debts, and adding as much towards my investments as possible. And I am aggressively investing that money. And again, that's not for everyone to take on that level of risk, but I'm taking on risk to let me get, returns that are not 8%, but I'm talking like 20% or higher, because I'm being very aggressive. I'm taking a lot of risk. There are years where I have huge losses, but granted, the potential for huge gains. But for me, I know what I'm getting into. And I am so determined. For me, 35, I've got another 3 years on my timeline. I'm so determined that in the next 3 years, I'm going to hit this mark. That's where my brain is at. I don't care about a down payment. This market is so hot. I'm not even worried about it, because realistically, even if I came up with this money, would I still even qualify for the remaining mortgage? If it's a $1 million home, that means I need an $800,000 mortgage. Would I even qualify with my current income? Probably not. And again, I'm going to show you the math on that at the end of this as well. So this should be a very stark slide that hopefully shifts your perspective a little bit. Oops. Okay, so, I did a lot of trashing on paying for a down payment too soon. I'm not saying don't buy a home. I'm not saying it's not worth it. But I am saying, seriously consider what's more important to you. And for me, cash flow freedom and financial independence sooner in my life is more important to me. I would much rather know that I don't have to worry about retirement, that I could actually stop working one day and be able to afford my life versus, just being able to post on Instagram that, look at me, I bought a home. Like, I don't care. I'll post that 10 years from now when I'm ready. But who am I trying to keep up with here? I will very happily be posting at age 65 that I am off jet setting around the world. Meanwhile, all of my colleagues who, stress themselves to buy a home they couldn't afford are going to be working for several years longer and stressing about their retirements. And Brittany notes here, assuming the house even sells for $1 million, consider everything is going way over asking. Yeah, exactly. She's got her own experience of trying to put in a bid that was so far exceeded in a sleepy little town that you think, oh, there's no problem. Like, I'll definitely just bid the asking price. Guess what? It is so hot that it doesn't matter where you're asking. There you go. She shared it $250,000 over the asking price. And it was a reasonably priced home too at the time. And that's what people overbid on the damn house. $250,000 over asking. Let that sink in. We're over here just trying to get even less than $250,000 as a down payment. And people are willing to pay that much more or take on that much bigger of a mortgage. To me, it's nonsensical. I am looking forward to my financial freedom. But nonetheless, let's look at the pros and cons here. So with renting, this is obviously not an exhaustive list, but think about it. Renting, there's flexibility in cash flow and in life choices, right? It's easier to pick up and move to a cheaper rental if it becomes available. You're able to travel and live abroad. There's nothing tying you in place. You can just easily end your lease, pack up, leave. I want to travel now, or I want to move countries altogether. If you own a home, it's not so easy to just walk away and travel. You could do it if you could afford it, but you're still stuck paying for your mortgage for the house that's here in Canada. You can't just up and leave the way you can leave a rental. And then that rental expense is gone because you're dealing with life wherever you are next. So buying, it's difficult to qualify for a mortgage to even win a bid on an ideal home. And it can be very costly and time consuming to sell if you want to move. There's less flexibility and cash flow freedom to just pick up and leave or do whatever it is you want in life. And not to mention, the additional expenses that come with home ownership, like surprise, there's a leaky roof. Surprise, your water heater broke down. And these are large expensive costs. If you're renting, this is not normally on you. If something's the matter, something major like that, electricity, plumbing, etc., you call your landlord, they deal with it. That's not on you. You pay your rent and then you wipe your hands clean of every other problem. That's not your problem. You pass the buck. But if you own the home, not only did you set yourself way back in being able to achieve financial freedom in retirement, but you probably depleted all of your investments and savings. So when something comes up, which it always does, you don't even have the cash to deal with it. And then you're still dealing with things like property taxes, which can get very expensive each year. So there's so many additional costs that come with it. Brittany notes, these houses are at 1% mortgage. When rates jump, yeah, you know what? Rates have already jumped. My sister-in-law is a mortgage broker, so she's been whispering all of this into my ear for quite some time. And even right now, I did some research prior to this and looked at what an average, 5-year fixed term rate is, and it's about 2%. Even a 1% jump on, if we're going to assume an $800,000 mortgage, let me do the math, 800,000 times 1%. That's an extra $8,000 already. We have to think about what your monthly mortgage is and what that 1% jump is going to be. It's going to be, at least a few $100s extra each month. And if you're already feeling stretched to pay the mortgage, that can be a big deal breaker for you. So it's so stressful, guys. Even if you get into a solid, mortgage rate now upfront, terms are only 5 years. Every 5 years you have to renew and go through this, fingers crossed stress test moment of, can you still afford your mortgage? Your story's not done just because you got the house and you got approved for a mortgage. Every 5 years, you still have to qualify for that mortgage that you have outstanding. And the only way that the housing market is going to cool down is if interest rates go up. Right now, there's so much demand for houses. People want out of their rental units, and interest rates have gone down, because of the pandemic. We're aware of the fact that people lost their jobs. We want to make it easier for people to afford to take on debt. So interest rates drop to staggeringly low levels. But interest rates were pretty high. Like, even thinking back in the 80s, they were like double digits back then. Can you imagine double-digit interest on $1 million today? That's insane. So I'm telling you that, this is going to come. Interest rate increases are the only way the housing market is going to cool off. To make it harder for people to just take on obscene amounts of debts, interest rates have to go up. And so the value of the value of homes will have to either slow in growth or even come down a bit to match those interest rate increases. And then, we'll be able to jump in because we think, okay, $1 million turned into a $700,000 home. That seems reasonable. I can save 20% for that. But again, what will interest rates be at that time? Can you afford the mortgage? Brittany notes, again, her parents' mortgage was 11% in 87. Yeah, so I'm not just pulling these stats out of, thin air to freak you out. I'm also not saying don't buy a home. I'm not saying it's not worth your while to do so. Again, I just want to bring some reality to the table here. If not even, in fact, I don't think this should stress you out. It should, if anything, bring you some peace to know that, okay, it's not just me. It's not that I'm failing. It's not that I'm not doing enough. I'm not earning enough. I'm not saving enough. I haven't gone far enough in my life. It's not just you. It's those freaking statistics we looked at. Everything is getting so expensive and our income is not matching what's happening. Inflation is killing us. So finally, I want to bring light to the fact that, again, if, you haven't been convinced yet and you're still holding on to this idea, but Cindy, aren't I wasting my money if I just keep renting? Like, sure, I might be able to achieve my retirement coast fire goals sooner, but aren't I wasting my money on rent in the meantime? That's not the right way to look at it. Even my mom, again, when I was trying to explain to her the reasons why I'm prioritizing my coast fire retirement goals over saving up for a house, she's like, but Cindy, a house is the best investment. Like, what else is going to grow at that rate? Cindy, like, you have to understand it's such a good investment. Like, Mom, it's not. If we're talking about your primary residence, you're buying a property to live in it. So I'm not talking about additional, properties that you're going to rent out and collect passive investment income from. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what most of us are trying to do here, which is simply have a home to live in as our primary residence. This is not an investment because, yeah, sure, it might grow at a rate that perhaps other regular investments won't grow at. But how do you access that money? If this is an investment that's growing in value and, oh my God, my $500,000 home turned into $1 million home, I just doubled my earnings. Well, great. How do you access all that money that you earn through this investment? There's only 2 ways you can do it. You got to take on debt. So either you have to take on, say you paid off your home and you want to access the equity in your house. Well, maybe now you have to remortgage your house just to access that money and make use of it. You need to take on a home equity line of credit. You need to take on a reverse mortgage. These are all forms of debt to access the equity within your home. If you still want to live in that home, the only way you're going to access this investment money is to take on debt. Now you're back where you started. That's unlike, having an investment in cash in a TFSA and RSP where if it doubles in value from 500K to $1 million, you want to access that cash? Withdraw it. Voila, $1 million in your hands. You just doubled your money. That's not how a home works. You're not just going to be able to take the money out in such a liquid manner like that. Otherwise, the only other way to access that money is to sell it. And great, you're going to realize your 500K profit. But now what? Don't you still want to live in a home somewhere? You sell this house, make a profit, but now you need to go buy a home somewhere else. But guess what? Your home is not the only one that increased in value. All the other properties in the area increased in value. So you sell your house for $1 million to go buy another house for $1 million. You have not made any gain here. So this is a trap. If you're going to think about buying a home because it's an investment, it is not. It's not a liquid investment. It's not going to provide you with any cash flow freedom from its growth. Okay, if you are in a beneficial position where you can have a home and then you're able to also afford additional properties that you rent out, yes, that's an investment. That's something that you can later sell and realize those gains for. That's something that you can collect rental income from to cover the cost of whatever you mortgaged it for, etc. That's something you can leave net positive with. Additional properties, not your primary residence. Your home is not an investment. Don't feel pressured to buy a home because your parents are still whispering in your ear what a good investment it is. You're making a mistake. Trust me, you need to buy a home. It's the only way you're going to grow your net worth. That's not true. I already showed you it's not true via the Coast Fire example. There are other ways you can make a great, incredible gain by essentially building up this 200K down payments on your retirement, not on a home. Because once this goes into a home, it's trapped. It's trapped in an illiquid investment asset, your home. This in an RSP or TFSA is not trapped. This is cash that you can take out and use. So finally, I want to look at some actual practical examples. Vissy, I am aware of the time here. I know we've got 10 minutes left. I just want to quickly catch up on the chat here. Montreal, there's still some affordable properties, but you need to be interested in living in Quebec. I like how you put that as, you know, a little preface there. Perhaps not everyone is interested in living in Quebec, but also, you know, typically they don't take kindly to any of us who can only speak English in Quebec. So I certainly wouldn't survive there. All right, anywhere outside of Ontario is pretty affordable besides BC. Well, that's true. I mean, I have friends who moved to Nova Scotia and they bought themselves a 3-story house for $250,000. So, you know, that's not a fairy tale, that's real. But again, you can't live here. You can't live in BC if that's what you want your situation to be. So now let's look at some real life numbers. What does it take to afford a mortgage? What does a long-term financial comparison of renting versus buying look like? I want to take a minute here to invite anyone to take themselves off mute. Do you have any questions before I dive into these examples? All right, I will move on. I'm going to do a new share. And switch it over to my screen here. I don't know if that worked. Let's try this again. Stop share and do a new share. Okay, everyone sees my window here. Yep, some things aside, perfect. So don't get overwhelmed by all the numbers on the screen. This is a tool that I had already created for another client who commissioned me to create it. And again, this sort of speaks to, you know, the things that you can get from me and from us at MakeCents. If you are curious about spelling things out, about creating unique tools for yourself, she wanted to really spell out renting versus buying in the long term. How is it going to affect her retirement and other things in general? So I created this tool for her. I've already gone and pre-populated the information here with some of the examples we use. For example, like the Abby and Alana scenario and that Coast Fire scenario. Let's assume we're starting at age 25. And our target retirement age is 65. I put in a net income of about 57K with current living expenses of 20K. So this excludes rental and housing costs and savings contributions. So all in, contributions to investments are on par with that scenario with the Coast Fire, $1,100 a month. That's $13,000 a year. So that's what's happening here and here. So for the most part, this is on par with that Coast Fire scenario. We're assuming 8% growth. I also put in the maximum CPP and retirements. We're going to assume that when you're in retirement, it's growing at 5% and that you want to take out that 125K. So I'm going to turn on to yes for the dollar amounts, fixed 125. Okay, in this scenario, we're going to assume rent costs $2,000 a month. I would say that's pretty realistic for Toronto or BC to get like a 1-bedroom. You know, the size of that is up for debate, but I would say $2,000 is pretty realistic. And I'm also assuming that rent increases at 1% net each year. So if we're assuming that inflation is 2%, this is actually saying that rent is increasing by 3%. So 1% net of inflation. So I think I'm being pretty conservative in assuming that amount. I think for a lot of us, you are in beneficial positions where your rent is not increasing drastically each year, but I imagine you're still seeing an increase nonetheless. So I factored that in. I'm not assuming that if we buy, it's an investment property. We're just buying to own it and live in it. So that doesn't count. Additional ownership costs. So this is things like condo fees, property taxes, gas, etc. This is pretty average, about 6,000 plus a year for property taxes on like $1 million home plus gas. That is pretty realistic, additional 500 plus a month. I'm also assuming that your house is going to appreciate by 5%, again, above and beyond inflation each and every year. All right, so now in that scenario where we're saying, okay, I'm putting down a $200K down payment, let's clarify for a second. I said $1 million, 20% is a $200K down payment. That's not technically true because you have to think about closing costs. And this is above and beyond your down payment. So if I actually change this to $1 million, we need to add an extra zero there. And 4% closing costs, that's actually going to cost you almost $250,000. So if you still want to put down 20% down payment, that additional 4% for land transfer, taxes, legal costs, etc., is out of pocket above and beyond the 20%. So if the 20% is what you want to avoid this CMHC insurance, which is mandatory if you pay less than 20%, and that gets tacked onto your mortgage, then what you really need is $240,000. But I wanted to make it on par with the example where, you know, she is actually putting down $200K coming out of her investments. Okay, so that is a mortgage of $668,000. I'm assuming 2% and an amortization of 25 years. And again, that's a monthly mortgage of 28. So we're already, you know, at a higher mortgage rate than our theoretical current rent. So what does all this spell out for us? All right, well, I said that in both scenarios, we are taking out a fixed 125K in income. So these income sources are identical currently between the two scenarios, but there's an issue with that, which I'm going to show you shortly. Let's look at, oh, but, you know, mom and dad's argument, you're wasting your money by, you know, throwing it away on rent versus buying, which is building up equity in your house. Let's actually look at what's happening here. Here are the cumulatives. So, you know, tacked on top of each other year after year. What are you paying in total? In this scenario, you know, in the housing situation, you're actually paying a lot more over the course of your life, pretty much until age 70, what is this, age 80 here. So again, assuming you bought at 35, that $800,000 home, you actually don't even break even with the cost of renting until age 80. Only at this point will you be quote unquote wasting your money on rent? So this blue scenario here, this is someone who is renting for their whole life. Again, you can see that, again, the cost of rent is going up because I said it's increasing by 1% above inflation. So even considering that increasing rental costs, this renter is still better off until age 80 before the homeowner is laughing like, ha ha ha, I paid less in total over the course of my life. And then, you know, you're kind of tilting your head like, but did you? So let's take a look here. Net worth. This is, again, mom and dad being like, but Cindy, you know, what other investment is going to keep up with that? Well, in this blue scenario, I let my investments keep riding. So my net worth does continue to grow, even though I'm drawing down on it in retirement. And yeah, this red scenario here, it does surpass it by a bit, not a lot, including the value of the house, which is growing at 5% above and beyond inflation. But again, what did I say in that other slide? You can't access that equity in your house unless you're going to sell the house and not buy another one, unless you're going to take on debt to access it. So what's really happening with your net worth if we exclude the value of the home? Well, renting blows it out of the water. And in fact, at age, it looks like, you know, 79 or so, the net worth is actually going into the negative. And why is that? Because I said we're taking a fixed withdrawal rate of 125. So let's go into retirement here and see what's happening. By retirement, in this case, and again, this isn't exactly line up with the Abby and Alana scenario because it is assuming that you're still contributing to your investments after the 10 years. So technically by this point, contributions would be 0 in both cases. But for sake of ease and just showing what's here, let's assume that you just keep adding $1,100 to your investments. By retirement, the renter has 4.5 million. The buyer has 1.3 million set aside in their investments. And so here is their retirement budget, this line here and this line here at the bottom. You can see that initially, well, they are trying to take out the same amount, 125. Value of the investments, how is that changing? We said roughly by 79, it's in the negative. Why? Because this person can't actually afford to have this 125K a year retirement income from their investments. They run out of money by age 78. The renter is laughing. The renter's got 6.2 million at age 78 still. So in fact, this scenario is not even possible for the buyer. So let's show something that is possible. Let's just use a percentage. And in this case, I'm saying, okay, withdrawal rate of 5%. So instead of a fixed 125K, let's just keep it on par with the rate of growth. Let's, you know, you're not taking out the same amount every year, but we want to make sure the money doesn't run out. So what's happening now? Well, now we can see, okay, if we assume you're withdrawing pretty much at the same rate that it's growing, what does that mean? You can see now the value of investments stay about the same. So you get to preserve your capital. Now what's the difference? The amount you're taking out. So now you're retiring. This person is taking out 200K a year, the renter. This person's only taking out 70K a year. Let's go back to the visual comparison. Suddenly you're laughing as a renter. These yellow lines here represent what you're taking out in your investments, and you're not running out of money. You're taking out so much more than this buyer here, which guess what? Is not even matching what they made during their employment earning years. And granted, a lot of retirees don't need to earn what they earned during their employment earning years, but nonetheless, this renter has a cushy lifestyle. They're traveling around the world. They may get sick and need to be put in a home. They can afford it. That's very expensive as well. So now we come back down here and see, okay, you know, now that we have a realistic situation where they're not running out of investment money. Okay, this situation does blow you out of the park. Again, it's just net worth that's tied up in a house. What's the real situation here? The renter still wins. If you exclude the value of the house, your net worth is still far exceeding the buyer in this situation. Your projected cash flow in retirement is so much higher. This is what I'm talking about. This is the coast fire I'm talking about. I don't sit, you know, it might not look like this for you exactly because at some point you want to buy a house. Many of us don't want to rent forever, but I'm just trying to illustrate how important it is to just prioritize your retirement assets first and foremost. Deal with the buying later in life. Does the renter always win in every scenario? No, they don't. The numbers matter. We don't have time to get into a situation where it's, you know, the situation flips. I just want to quickly jump to the affordability scenario here, assuming that you can even afford the mortgage. So in the same scenario where I said a 57 net income, that's roughly a 70K gross income. So again, we used that number earlier. If you're earning 70K gross, you're making about 57 net. But as it relates to a mortgage and qualifying for one, they use your gross household income. Not to be confused with net business income. It's still net business after expenses, but before taxes, so still gross. So assuming 70K gross, again, 2% interest, 25 years, there's that mortgage we said we were taking on in this scenario here. Oh, no, I lied, 835. Total mortgage. Oh wait, no, I said that was the value of the home. Excuse me, purchase price 835, the mortgage was 668. There's your monthly mortgage payments. I inputted those heating costs again. I added in some property taxes. Let's assume some car payments or not. I use my example. I'm paying 150 by weekly for my car, so I threw that in there. Technically, if I was earning this gross and that's the mortgage I wanted, I can't afford it. I would not be eligible because these debt servicing ratios have maximums. Gross debt servicing ratio, let me just open that up to show you what that is. Gross debt servicing ratio calculates all of the home costs that are involved, your mortgage payment, heating, and property taxes. This is what they'll actually use to qualify you for a mortgage. They add all of this up per month and divide by your gross income per month. Again, these numbers are not the numbers I have on the other page. And then see, okay, does this ratio in line? Is it less than 32%? Great. And then they look at your total debt servicing ratio. So same amounts again, mortgage payment, but also payments you're making on additional debts, your credit card, line of credit, card payments, other debts. That ratio needs to be less than 40%. And in this case, I am far exceeding it. So here's what I would actually need to earn to afford this mortgage / any of you who want to afford a $600,000 and $6,800,000 mortgage. This is what you need to earn. Now, let's assume you don't have a car and we're just dealing with this here. And you don't have any other debt payments, by the way. I said 0 here, but many of you are still paying down other debts, such as your OSAP, your credit card, etc. So best case scenario, you have no debts whatsoever. You don't have a car you're paying for. You own it outright. All we're worried about is just heating costs and property taxes. I still need to earn $123,000 just to be in line. Just taking a moment to pause to let that sink in here.
Would it be possible, Cindy, if I don't know if you're able to share this. I know Brittany just asked if it's possible for us to share this. And actually, any other resources like we can share, like maybe an Inner Village, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, this is a very technical tool. I do have a lot of notes built in here to help you understand how to fill it out. But yes, I'd be happy to share this. This isn't normally something I'd give out for free, but
okay.
No, I would be happy to share this with the Inner Village. But again, making sense of it is something different altogether. So if you want to book time with me to sit and talk through your situation, I'm happy to do it. But otherwise, I can share this with you, with Inner Village in particular. Happy to make that exception for you guys because again,
hey, Cindy.
Yeah.
I meant share the mortgage qualifier tool because that's really helpful. I hadn't actually seen that. The government of
all
Canada.
of this will be built in. I will share this tool in particular. I've lumped it all in.
Yeah.
Like this I tacked on for today because I want to know what it takes to qualify for a mortgage. So yeah, I will share this with the Village. because it is very telling, right? If you want to, again, right now I have this pulling from the other sheet, but I'll change it such that everything is manual. So you can adjust all these numbers for yourself. And then it'll tell you, are you in line or are you not? So, you know, maybe we want to take on a smaller mortgage, maybe just $500,000. That's 5 million, excuse me. I still exceed it.
Oh, sorry. No, I was like, I'm also going to put Cindy's website and IG as well, in case people want to follow for some more tips and stuff.
Yeah, and I know we're over time, but I am done here. I just want to quickly, you know, show what it takes. Again, if 70K relates to most of you in the room and you feel like, yeah, I'm bringing that in roughly, maybe we'll even lower it to be a little bit more modest for those of you who are new in your business and say 60K gross a year. What can you afford? Let's keep bringing this down. Nope, can't afford that. Ooh, almost. Total debt is there because I have no other debts, but still gross debt does not qualify. I can't afford the actual home costs. So even less, even less. Oh my God, almost there, just barely there. We'll call it 274. This is very depressing. When will I get there? Whew, okay. I can afford roughly just over $250,000 of a mortgage if I'm bringing in gross 60K, assuming these numbers are in line, which is a pretty good average. Again, I researched this number to see what our average, as it relates to Toronto, what our average monthly heating costs, about $50 a month. So that's what I put times 12. What are property taxes? I actually researched this number to see what the percentage is, and it's based on the value of the home again. So technically, you know, if I'm taking on this mortgage amount, we have to assume I'm buying a much cheaper home. Maybe I'll call it, and again, I'll modify these values to be a little easier for you guys to manipulate, but nonetheless, we're still close to the max ratios here. Like, this is very depressing to think that this is the mortgage that I can get if I'm earning 60K, which I think is a pretty good average starter salary. A lot of us are thinking, great, I can get a head start in my life now. Not so much. Maybe a condo, maybe a home in another province. But to afford a home in Toronto, to be part of that statistic that I showed you at the start, you're not doing it solo. You have help. So again, this is an opportunity for all of you to learn, to reflect on your circumstances and know that context matters. Don't feel so depressed about the fact that you're not there yet, about the fact that you may need help, because many of us do. A large portion of those people who are affording homes and those stats had help. So please understand that, appreciate it. Context matters. Don't compare yourself, and be well. I'm going to hand it back to you, Bessie.
No, thank you. I'm just reading some of the comments. People are saying, you know, hello, tiny home studios, and just thanking you how insightful this was. I know this has been really, really helpful for me. I'm really looking forward to seeing you share some more resources in Inner Village, and anyone else, if anyone listens to podcasts or reads about this topic, would love to share that. And for everyone else, just know that our next event is actually going to be next week. It's on November 3rd, which will be our Trapsoul Yoga Gentle Floor and Restore. So excited to see you there with Denise. Thank you so much again, Cindy. This has been extremely educational. And again, looking forward to continuing this conversation in Inner Village. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you for all your reactions.